So we've gathered together in the monastery and online to practice Dhamma together for a few days because it's holiday time. And here in Melbourne, the weather is nice, which is good. We're blessed by a warm autumn. And we've just taken refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the Buddha being our teacher, the Dhamma, the teachings that lead to the end of suffering. Sangha, the group of enlightened beings, men and women who've practiced since the time of the Buddha and also realized the Dhamma. And undertaken to keep the 8 precepts for the next few days to help make us more mindful of our conduct, to be more mindful of our intentions, our intentional actions that lie behind our conduct. And precepts, they're quite straightforward. You just recited 8 of them. They're not that hard to remember. But in the practice, it's important to realize we're training ourselves, our conduct. Precepts are particularly for external conduct, speech, actions, to bring up mindfulness and then be harmless conduct. So we're not hurting ourselves or others directly or indirectly through our actions, our speech. What do we get from that? Well, we get a mind that is free from regret, self-criticism, uncertainty, fear, suspicion. So basically we get happiness. I just chanted this now, Silena Sukhating Yanti. We keep precepts, we train with precepts for our own happiness. The way my teachers used to say, they keep us out of trouble. You keep the precepts and the precepts keep you out of trouble. They keep you in a state of mind that is free from remorse and regret. You feel at ease, you feel comfortable. And so it's very appropriate at this time on a meditation retreat, whether you're at home or in the monastery, to follow the 8 precepts. Means that your behavior is very peaceful, calm. You have this sense of being at ease, self-respect. You don't have, at this time, any reason to criticize yourself. And this is laying the foundation for meditation, going into deeper states of peace, mindfulness, samadhi, and then insight, understanding. As you'll notice, when we forget the precepts, we're not using them as sort of training guidelines. Sometimes we say something, sometimes we do something that brings up this sense of regret. Will straight away come back up in our mind and we don't feel at ease anymore. Sometimes it's just a momentary lapse when we say something a bit hurtful or foolish or not true, and then we gather our mindfulness back and we realize what we've said, and we feel a little bit of discomfort in the mind. We feel uneasy. And you'll see that when you meditate. You're sitting meditation or walking meditation, you're with yourself and something will come up in your mind. If you haven't been keeping precepts or using them as guidelines, you'll tend to have memories coming out of what you've said and done that don't sit right in your mind. You may even have a regret, oh, why didn't I keep the precept in that situation? Keep my mouth shut and not say those words or not do that thing. So they're a training that helps and supports the training of the mind. They're an integral part of the Buddhist path for the end of suffering. They're not the only part of the path, of course, but they're an integral part for training ourselves. And it's important to see that what the Buddha taught is a method or a training, a way of training ourselves to overcome suffering. And when we come to meditate, it's important to get the understanding, the right view, the right understanding established first. Why are we meditating? What's the purpose of it? Ajahn, my teacher, used to emphasize that all the time. We have to establish our mind in right view, right understanding, or samadhi, so that the rest of the path, the practice of mindfulness, right speech, right effort, and then developing states of calm and insight will flow on from that. So they compare right view to like the lamp or the torch. Here we live in the forest and we walk around the forest at night. You need a lamp or a torch to shine the way so you don't trip over yourself or other things, bump into animals or tree stumps. Right view is like that. As you begin your meditation and your practice of the Buddhist path, you have to establish right view or keep coming back to re-establish it, because we forget as well, or we get lost. And this sets up the right causes and conditions for other skillful qualities of mind to arise. So what is the heart of right view? Well, the understanding and awareness of the Four Noble Truths. What makes a Buddha, or any student of the Buddha? Why do they become enlightened? What is enlightenment? It's realization, penetration of the Four Noble Truths. So it's a clear recognition of dukkha, or suffering, for what it is, seeing suffering as suffering, knowing that. And then understanding and seeing what is the cause of suffering. We say craving, attachment, tanha, upadana, and making that effort to abandon craving and attachment because it's the cause of suffering. And then realization of the cessation of suffering, nirodha. It's something to be realized, experienced for yourself. Having abandoned craving and attachment and ignorance that underlies it, one experiences cessation of suffering. And that's something we have to do over and over again until eventually no more craving and attachment arises. And that's what we call nibbana. And how do we do that? Well, we cultivate the path, the Eightfold Noble Path, beginning with right view, right understanding, correct understanding of the way things are, what is suffering, its cause, what we have to do, how we have to go in our practice. So the Buddhist description of enlightenment, or the awakening of the mind, centers around this, the realization of the Four Noble Truths. And when we come to meditate, that's the kind of understanding we bring up in the beginning, just to set our mind in the right direction, or to shine the light on what we're doing. So over the next 3 days of practice, we're shining a light on these Four Noble Truths for ourselves. So that means training, cultivation of the path on the level of our speech and our actions, which is what we call sila, morality, and then deepening that, turning attention inwards. We call it the Opanayika Dhamma, as we just chanted earlier. Opanayiko, bringing the Dhamma inwards, bringing our attention inwards to actually see these Four Noble Truths as they are in our own experience, our own mind. You may have read and heard much Dhamma, depending on where you're at in your practice. You may be a beginner who's just read and heard a little bit, or you may be well experienced, practice for many, many years, 10s and 20s and 30s of years. Doesn't matter. what we've heard and learned on the outside is all vital and valuable, but now is the time to bring it in. Open ayako, bring it in. The word in Thai is nom kalma, which means almost like to bend or incline your mind to the Dhamma. That's the Dhamma as it arises in your experience. So not just on the page of the book, not just the words that the teacher says, but bending or inclining your mind to actually see and realize the Dhamma for yourself. And it may be as simply as establishing mindfulness at a time when you have stress in your mind. You're angry, you're worried, you're fearful, you're distracted, you're obsessed with some kind of desire for something. Your mind is not peaceful, it's agitated. It may be as simple as establishing mindfulness at that moment, maybe using a meditation object that you've used before, that you've found skillful and helpful to you. So establishing mindfulness on the breathing, for example, but that's not the only way to establish mindfulness. But for example, at that moment when you're stressed, you turn to the breath and the stress dissolves. All the importance your mind was giving to those thoughts of anger, worry, fear, greed, the importance that the mind was giving previously dissolves because you're now giving importance to the breath and becoming mindful of the breath. So you're not feeding suffering in its cause. You recognize suffering, you're stressed, you're unhappy, your mind is not peaceful. You recognize the cause is the unskillful, or we say negative desire, the wanting, or the not wanting in the case of aversion or hatred. You've recognized that that's what you have to abandon. And the mechanism, the path at that moment, is establishing some mindfulness on the breath and the importance you are giving to the greed, the anger, the fear, the worry disappears, ends at that moment, and now you're with the breath, if only for a few minutes, a few moments even. And you're experiencing a few moments of Nirodha, the third noble truth. It's as simple as that. You're turning away, letting go of some anger, some worry, going to the breath, which is peaceful, which brings a sense of clarity, brings your mind to the present moment, so you establish mindfulness, clear comprehension in the present moment, and then you experience Nirodha, the cessation of suffering at that moment. That's what we call practice, the Four Noble Truths in practice. And that's what you can do very well at this time, practicing a meditation retreat, keeping precepts, focusing on the Dhamma practice for the next few days, bringing up mindfulness, sitting, walking, standing, even when you're lying down to have a rest. You can establish mindfulness of the Four Noble Truths and practice Nirodha as you fall asleep at night. You notice at times when we're least mindful, the most stress and suffering comes up, doesn't it? One of those times is when you're going to sleep at night. All the day's worries, all the things that are still bugging you and the problems of your life will start to flow into the mind as you lie down. It's kind of like your guard is off at that moment and memories flood in about your day, what happened, who said what happened, you did this, they did that, there's this problem and that worry. That's a common time when people really suffer just before they go to sleep. And of course, if you're really stressed at that time, you can't sleep. So we have to learn to practice mindfulness and this path of practice and develop right understanding and look at the Four Noble Truths. Even as we're going to sleep at night, it can help us. It may help you to sleep without the need of pills or music or all the other things we use to relax ourselves when we're stressed. Simply turning to something skillful like the breath or the thought of metta, loving kindness, bringing up the mindfulness, putting your mind on that object and letting go with mindfulness, with clarity of a particular stressful thought. And at that moment, you're experiencing nirodha, cessation of suffering, right at the moment you're falling asleep. And so you'll tend to sleep better. If you fall asleep mindfully, you'll tend to sleep better. If you wake up in the middle of the night, again, worrying about something, you can repeat the action. And a lot of our practice is repeating skillful action over and over again till your mind gets it, gets the point, and starts letting go more naturally, more automatically, because you've done it enough. And then when you wake up in the morning, it's not that difficult to re-establish mindfulness, even as you're lying in bed. You know, as the mornings get colder, we're going in the southern hemisphere, we're going into winter, so the warm mornings get colder, the bedclothes become more attractive. But you can still go to your mindfulness at that point when you would rather turn over and indulge in the warmth of the bed. There's another part of the mind saying, oh, just establish mindfulness. Once you've got clarity, you just get up and carry on practicing. This is the value of practicing on a retreat, is you're really making every part of your day part of the practice. Establishing mindfulness, recognizing dukkha, seeing its cause when your mind gets caught into some negative desire, some wanting, some craving. Bringing out the mindfulness, letting it go, getting the clarity, the peace of cessation, nirodha, and then repeating it. And every time you get lost in your thoughts and your daydreams and your moods, working to re-establish mindfulness, let them go, see them as impermanent, as not self. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. And that's the real efficient way, most efficient way to experience nirodha, the third noble truth, is seeing your own body and mind as anicca, dukkha, anatta. And to do that, you have to establish the clarity. You might say that's the real heart of right view, right understanding, is seeing these characteristics in your experience. And that's both physical experience, how your body manifests for you, how it looks, and then the sensations and feelings associated with this body. And in the world around you, other people, things, material things, they're also anicca, dukkha, anatta. And then, of course, your mind, coming back to pay attention to your mind and seeing these three characteristics in your experience. And this is what directly leads to nirodha, cessation. In the way the Buddha taught, in the way Ajahn Ajahn Chah taught, often it's the most simplest situation that can give you some of the most profound insights. It's another misunderstanding that we often bring to the practice of meditation, is that we have to have read all the suttas and heard all the talks and know every last detail of the Dhamma and what the Buddha taught. And then sometimes we feel inadequate. We feel, oh, there's so much. I don't know it all. I can't remember it all. It's too difficult, too much. Actually, a lot of people have experienced nirodha in the most ordinary situations. It could be just being mindful as you eat food, watching yourself lift the spoon to your mouth, chew. You're obviously not distracted with conversation and other things, but just quietly meditating as you eat your food, observing your food, maybe observing the desire for the tasty food, the smell, the color, the anticipation of the nice taste, and chewing it. But then because you maintain mindfulness, observing that all dissolve in your mouth, and how the pleasure of eating a mouthful of tasty food ends because you've chewed it and then you swallow it. It's impermanent. Maybe as you become more mindful, simply noticing the tiredness of chewing. Even the tastiest food, you get tired chewing it. Your jaw muscles ache the more you chew. And if you chew something hard, even something tastes good, but it's hard and tough, it can even be a little bit painful. And then you've got to digest it. So when you meditate after a meal, you get tired because all your blood and energy has gone down to the stomach to digest the food. So if you're sitting after a meal, you'll find it's quite hard because you're beset by sleepiness. But you keep your mindfulness going. Maybe you get up and do walking meditation, it's easier, but you're observing cessation of that desire for food, the pleasure, the chewing, the enjoyment, and then the cessation, and maybe even observing dukkha along the way. And ultimately, it's all gone. It's just a process, and you've digested it. Later, you go to the toilet. And that's just happening by itself. That's just nature. Humans need food to survive, just as we need breath, we need water. So just in the course of a meditation retreat where you're quiet, practicing mindfulness, you can observe that, and you see there's actually really no self in all of that. You say it's my food, I'm eating, I'm enjoying, then I have my full stomach, and then I have sleepiness to deal with, then I have to go to the toilet, and I have to have a wash. But actually it's just, we say elements and khandhas. It's just body and mind doing its thing. It's nature. And you're kind of witnessing that as you become more mindful. And you're witnessing these three characteristics which take away the craving and attachment, and you're observing it more just as the way it is. Chewing, swallowing, digesting, bathing yourself at the end of the day, resting, getting up, sitting, walking, changing posture. And when you get a really deep experience of Nirodha, maybe there's this sense of just seeing the body, it's just a body. We say like seeing it like a puppet or a doll or something that's without really an owner, without any ownership. You're just observing or witnessing it the way it is. It's just a part of nature. And what happens at the end of your life, the body goes back to nature. We bury it, cremate it, and the elements go back to the elements of nature. But in one retreat, you're observing these truths. You're establishing right view that this body is impermanent, it's unsatisfactory, it doesn't last, can't bring you lasting happiness, and it's not a self. In one day or one part of a day, you can observe that. You're establishing right view, mindfulness, wisdom, insight as you go, and experiencing the Four Noble Truths as they are. Suffering, its cause, the cessation of suffering, and the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And a lot of what we'll be doing over the next few days is bringing up the path, coming back to Magga, the path factors, establishing the right understanding, the mindfulness, the effort, the calm that comes from the presence of mindfulness, and then investigating the truth, developing insight into these three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactory, not self. And you're seeing that in your body, in feelings, pleasure, and then pain, and then back to pleasure again, always changing according to causes and conditions. Perceptions, thought formations, sense consciousness. Getting to see the reality of these things, what we call the five groups, or the five aggregates, five places, you could even say. Your five areas where you're observing anicca, dukkha, anatta, and seeing ultimately you don't own body and mind. They're not self. Sense of self arises, of course, but you're seeing through that, seeing it as a delusion. So the only way you can see the delusion of self is by questioning it, investigating, asking yourself, what is this? Is this really me, mine, myself? And more you experience a cessation and letting go of self and the grasping, the attachment. And a meditation retreat is the most ideal time to practice that. You keep coming back to the present moment, observing thoughts and feelings arising, passing away, and seeing the conditioned nature of our experience rather than always having this sense of self-importance, my feeling, my thought, my action, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm like this, I'm like that. When we're not mindful of the Four Noble Truths, the sense of self takes over. But you have to ask yourself, where does that lead us? It leads us to more suffering, dissatisfaction, agitation. Because as soon as you have the sense of self grasping at a desire for something, then you're agitated. As soon as the sense of self is repulsed by something, averse to something, you're agitated, you're not peaceful. When you establish mindfulness, your mind is going into the middle, this place of the center where it's observing experience and observing the three characteristics of experience, but not grasping, not attached, not clinging. Because if you really see impermanence, or you know you can't cling to something that's impermanent, so naturally your mind lets go. Every thought, every memory, every feeling, and then the body itself, we let go of grasping and attachment, and that's where you experience cessation. So these are a few Dhamma reflections for this first part of the retreat. So I welcome you all again to this retreat, and encourage you to really put effort into your practice of developing mindfulness and then investigating the Dhamma. Use this time well for your benefit and the benefit of everyone around you, because if you're experiencing more nirodha, more cessation, it will also help your family, friends, workmates, neighbors, strangers, even animals appreciate it when people are letting go of their stress and suffering and experiencing nirodha. It's good for all of us. It's good for the world. You're doing a little bit for the peace of the world by developing inner peace, the cessation of suffering. So I'll leave these first reflections here, and in a moment we'll do some walking meditation for about 30 minutes. And somebody will be walking meditation on screen online for you to see, but you don't really need to look at them, but they're just a reminder of the walking practice, how we do it. And if you're in a small room somewhere in your house or some part of the world, then even if you're in a small room, you can still practice mindful walking. It's a change of posture that helps you to relax a bit. You're keeping the precepts, you're mindful, and you can observe the arising and passing away of physical and mental phenomena as you walk. And you just walk backwards and forwards between two walls, say, or two items of furniture, or two, if you're outdoors, 2 points mindfully and probably slowly because you're in a limited space. Just walk slowly back and forward, keeping your attention on your feet, the feeling, the sensation of your feet touching the ground. That can be your point of contact for establishing mindfulness. And then everything else, you just allow it to arise and pass away. You don't have to do anything with your thoughts, your feelings. You just note them and let them go. And keep bringing up mindfulness. So we can do that for 30 minutes, and then we'll ring the bell and you can come back and sit, and we'll do some sitting meditation after that. So you can bow to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha and then head off to find your place to walk.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.